So I want to tell you the first thing is, in this country, we're using the Westminster system. There's three parts of the government. You've got the Parliament, the Judiciary, the Executive. The Executive is the lowest part. The Chief Health Officer is a member of the Executive. His directives are what's called public policy. It's the lowest part of the legal system. It's binding on the public service. It's not even binding on the cops. They're officers of the Crown. The public policy can't bind officers of the Crown. They can't bind the judiciary. So if you don't want to follow it, well, we saw in a video by Marty Fokker, the police were really smart in that one. They said, you've got to watch this guy. He could be recording you. He fucking was. And what did they say? What are we going to do? We've got to charge him to get him on bail. But what are we going to charge him with? All of the COVID stuff's being withdrawn. And it is, because it's public policy. Right? So don't worry about that. Now, the remedy in this state and every other state, if you've got a problem with any of this stuff and you get charged, you must go to human rights. They are vulnerable to human rights claims. Now, the Health and Wellbeing Act that they are making their directives under must have an override in its preamble to say that parts of it overcome the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. Go and have a look. It has no override. Even if they could overcome the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, guess what? There's a problem. In Section 51 of your Constitution, you've got subsection 29. It's a two-word entry, external affairs. That's the treaty-making power of the Commonwealth. And I took a screenshot for you guys this morning because I didn't want to try and quote it from memory. I thought I'd read it out. I even bought my trusty reading implements. I'll find this eventually. Give me a couple of days. And this is off the Parliament's website, the Commonwealth Parliament. Hang on, I'll just blow this up. So it says, and this is totally contrary to what they tell you in law school. I only spoke to a lawyer who got his practice certificate 6 months ago and he knew nothing of this. So this is on the Commonwealth Parliament website, and if you type in human rights in Australian law, you'll find it. Human rights are codified in international agreements or treaties between governments called conventions or covenants. International human rights treaties provide an agreed set of human rights standards and establish mechanisms to monitor the way that a treaty is implemented. By ratifying a treaty, a country voluntarily accepts legal obligations under international law. Obligations is an interesting word. It's an alternative of duty. A right can be exercised or not. You have discretion, but you don't on a duty. You must exercise it. So then they tell us the actual human rights treaties we have that you can exercise that they don't want you to know about, so they don't tell you. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which we'll come back to because Victoria's already been screwed with that one. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Take very, very careful notice of this one. This is your remedy. The Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. There's your remedy. It's in that treaty. And the others are the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It then says, it is against these treaties that human rights scrutiny processes under the Human Rights Parliamentary Scrutiny Act 2011 are undertaken. Australia also has periodic treaty body reporting obligations under these treaties. So there's actually a committee within the Commonwealth Parliament that must examine every single bill presented to see if the bill conforms to those treaties. And guess what happens when they don't? It's called ultra vires. It's the doctrine of ultra vires. It's outside of power because it's international law and it overcomes the Constitution. So if the state makes a law that contravenes one of these treaties, Section 109 says where a law of the Commonwealth interferes with the law of the state, the law of the Commonwealth shall take precedence. And in 1974, in the Franklin Dam case, Tasmania lost when the Commonwealth used a treaty to stop a dam. Now, we owe some very, very, very big thanks to a young woman called Corinna Horvath. And I bet none of you have ever heard of her, but in 1996, she was bashed by the police in her house in Hastings. And it went all the way through the system. And in 2014, the Kensington and Flemington Legal Service went and retained Dyson Hall Lacey, a QC from Melbourne, and they took a claim against Australia, because they're the signatory, not Victoria. They took a claim to the UN Human Rights Commission, and Australia lost. It's called Horvath versus Australia. So from then on, from 2014, they now know you can get them. So there were 4 things that Australia was ordered to do. The Victorian government had to compensate Corinna. They had to apologise in writing. They had to change the laws on how an individual could sue the police, and they had to publicise it. Guess how many of those 4 things they did? 4! So if they didn't have to do it, they wouldn't. Now I'd like to point out to you, with these mandates, it's garbage, man. So those who can do, those who can't, threaten. If they had the power to forcibly vaccinate you, they would have just amended the Health and Wellbeing Act. But they know they can't do it because of the treaty I told you. So what did they do? Subterfuge, psychological operations. I learned about PSYOPs in the army. It's a whole PSYOP. They're playing you. They're not playing me. I'm trained against that shit. So these guys can't. So they threaten you. And do you know how you defeat those people? Call their bluff. If everybody in this park right now said, nope, not doing it, it'll end tomorrow. They can't sustain it. The police are wasting their time enforcing it. It gets written off. So if you go to the Constitution again, look in Section 75. It tells you the jurisdiction of the High Court. And one of the jurisdictions in the original jurisdiction, not the appellate, is any matter arising under a treaty. And those are treaties. As soon as a state wants to play silly buggers with you, just say to them, listen, you can do that, but I might have to go to the High Court and do this. And if they don't, well, I'll just go and get the Flemington and Kensington Legal Service, and we'll see you in the Human Rights Commission. And you watch those guys back down so fast, they'll make a sonic boom going down the tree. That's your remedy. So, thanks for coming, guys.